My name is David, and tell me something. Have you ever had a moment in your life when a single sentence was able to break everything in half? I did. And it happened on a night when the house should be full of warmth, family, Christmas. But it became the place where I heard the harshest words a parent can hear. Sometimes I still wonder, how does someone you raised with your own hands find the courage to say that you are no longer part of their life? I know that, if you are here, you may carry this same feeling that something does not fit, that the love you gave did not come back in the same way. The pain of not being seen, of not being remembered, of being treated as if it had lost value. It's a feeling that slowly corrodes, and when it arrives, no one is prepared. Today I'm going to open that door with you. I'll tell you how that Christmas dinner in the house I built with Elizabeth there in Oak Park changed everything. Like an entire family, he felt the tension in the air, even before the turkey came out of the oven, and how a single sentence divided my life between before and after. At the end of this story, you will understand, and you may never see Christmas the same way again. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. There are words that, when spoken, never come back. That night, with the table set, the plates full, the house full, my son stood up with a glass of wine in his hand, looked me in the eye and said in the coldest voice I've ever heard, "Dad, you're no longer part of our family. We've already passed." That was not just a sentence. It was a sentence, but I didn't answer. I only handed him a briefcase, a parting gift. And when it opened, the course of the night turned, the course of his life too. But I'll tell you about that right away. First, I want to ask you something. If you've come this far and you're feeling that tightness in my chest that I felt that night, if this story reminds you of something you lived, or almost lived, it lets me know that I'm not alone. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, because telling it hurts. It hurts to relive. But if you're here with me, if I know there's someone on the other side listening with an open heart, I'll follow, because there are truths that only we who lived understand. That Christmas Eve, I woke up before the sun. The clock was still ticking 5 a.m. when I went down the stairs with my knees snapping at each step. I made the coffee like Elizabeth used to make, very strong, the way she said it. Woke up to the soul. I sat at the table, looking at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. It was the first Christmas without her, and even so I had done everything to make the house the way she liked. The tree had already been set up since the beginning of December, with the old decorations, some made of glass, others that our son made at school, when he was still a boy who asked for lap and not silence. I spent all day cooking. I prepared the cranberry stuffed turkey, the garlicky mashed potatoes Elizabeth loved, the star-shaped buttery cookies, even though I knew that maybe no one would touch them. I did this not because I expected gratitude, but because that's how we've always done it. Family was this, repeating the rituals to keep the memories alive. The first guests arrived around 5 in the afternoon. My sister Helen came driving from Milwaukee, brought an apple pie and a tight hug. Soon the cousins appeared, the neighbors of the front house all in their thick coats brushing snow off their shoulders. The house was filled with voices, with suppressed laughter, with the smell of pine and cinnamon. But Ethan's place, it was empty for hours. He arrived last. He walked in with Jennifer carrying a box of expensive Whole Foods desserts, berry-laced cheesecakes that no one had ordered. They didn't even bother to say, "Merry Christmas." They only said that the traffic was terrible. And with that, they passed right past me. Not even a hug, nor a handshake. During dinner, I tried to strike up a conversation. I commented on the recipe for the puree, told me about when Elizabeth made a mistake in the salt, and we laughed for half an hour. No one laughed now. Ethan was all the time playing with his cell phone, sending a message to who knows who while whispering to Jennifer, who only moved her fork on the plate without eating almost anything. I saw it in her eyes, boredom, and in Ethan's impatience. When I mentioned that I kept the ornaments from his childhood very carefully, he let out a muffled laugh. Jennifer rolled her eyes. A part of me wanted to pretend I didn't see it, but I did. I always see it. Struggled. I spoke of the time when I built that house with my own hands, the carpet that Elizabeth chose even when we had little. Jennifer made a comment. "This carpet, it should be in a museum." Laughed. Ethan laughed along. There my heart cracked. The room was full of people, but I felt like an old piece of furniture in the corner. I watched Ethan talking loudly about a new investment, some startup, while completely ignoring the people around him. He said that he needed space, modernity, freedom. He was talking about the house, as if it were not mine. It was at that moment that I stopped. I kept looking at him, trying to find in that man's face the boy who ran into the yard in his pajamas the first time it snowed. The boy who fell and cried, and I went there and held him, but he was no longer there. My eyes drifted to Jennifer. She smoothed the wine glass with her fingers, as if she already knew everything was under control. That's when I realized I was no longer part of that world they wanted to build, at least not as I am, and maybe it never was. You know, there's something we learned too late, is that silence also screams, and that night, he screamed inside me. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been surrounded by people but with your soul alone? Have you ever noticed that someone you raised, protected, fed, now it looks at you as if you were a nuisance, a piece out of place? If this has crossed you, let me know. Right there in the comments. I've lived it, or it touched me. Sometimes the shared pain is less heavy. Even with a heavy heart, I continued serving the food. The turkey was still hot, the plates were full, but it seemed that no one had an appetite, not for the food. Ethan started drinking faster. His voice rose. He told advantages, spoke of rotating assets, of detaching from the past, always in a generic way, but his look, it was always for me. Jennifer from time to time would say a phrase like, "This house has potential, it just needs a renovated one." Or, "An open space here would be amazing." She spoke of my house as if it were a project at auction. There I felt that something was being plotted, but I preferred to remain silent, because sometimes what hurts is not the scream. It is the wait for the coup, and the coup was yet to come. But when it came, it was like a cold blade, and the worst. It's just that everyone saw it, including me. And even so, I couldn't get up from my chair. Want to know what he said in front of everyone? And what did I do right after, with a black folder that changed the course of that supper? So stay with me, because it was there that everything started to turn. The room fell silent. Silence indeed. One of those that come not only from the mouth shut, but from the heart stopping beating for a second. Ethan stood up with the glass of wine in his hand and lightly tapped the glass with the knife, as if he were going to make some speech. I was still munching on a piece of turkey when I heard him say, "Dad, we need to say something we decided a long time ago." His glass trembled a little. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the weight of what was about to be said. Jennifer crossed her legs, with that discreet smile, as if she already knew what she was talking about. He continued, "You are no longer part of our life. It's time to move on. We are past that phase." I stood there, with the fork still in my hand, unable to swallow. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't a fight. It was a sentence, cold, calculated, and out loud, in front of my whole family. Jennifer just nodded, as if signing a contract. Helen, my sister, dropped her napkin on her lap and said, "Wait, Ethan, what's this story?" But he ignored it. He kept saying that I was stuck in the past, that my way of living got in the way, that I refused to change, that the house was decaying, that modern life demanded more than I could offer, that they needed space, freedom, renewal. I heard every word, one by one, as if each syllable pushed a nail deeper into the chest. None of the cousins said anything. Some lowered their heads. Others looked at the plate as if looking for some excuse to disappear. Jennifer held the glass as if toasting in silence to my expulsion. "You're a burden, Dad," he said. "An emotional burden. An obstacle." I closed my mouth slowly and left the fork on the plate. The dishes made a dry sound. It was as if my body had been disconnected from the soul. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to get up and leave without looking back. But I just sat there. The blood boiled, but the face, cold as marble. I stared at Ethan for a few seconds. He looked away. Jennifer did not. Jennifer looked at me directly as if to say, "We did it." Maybe she thought I was going to cry, or beg, but all I did was get up, without a word. I went to the office and came back with a black briefcase. It had been ready for weeks, but I didn't know this would be the occasion. I put the folder on the table. I pushed until I was right in front of Ethan. "Then take that too," I said. He frowned, opened it, and began to flip through the papers inside. His eyes moved fast. Jennifer tilted her neck to look as well, and that's when their expression changed. But I haven't said anything yet. I sat down again. I took the glass of wine, took a sip. Silent. Worthy. Deep down, I already knew that this was going to happen. I just didn't know it hurt that much. And at that moment a certainty was born inside me. If it was war they wanted, then they would have it. But in my own way. In silence. With elegance. And without prior notice. They thought they had carried out the coup. Little did they know what I had already done in the previous weeks. Do you have any idea what was inside that briefcase? And why did Ethan start sweating even with the window open and the snow falling outside? I'll tell you. But first, you need to understand how far their betrayal has come, and how I found out everything without them noticing. I went back to my chair as if nothing had happened. I took the glass of wine, looked at those who still had the courage to face me, and said, "Merry Christmas." Is that it? Without another word. The fork was still in the same place. The turkey is already cooling on the plate. No one knew what to say. Helen looked at me with teary eyes as if she wanted to get up and hug me but stayed there, respecting my silence. Ethan, on the other side of the table, opened the briefcase slowly, running his eyes over the papers. He did not immediately understand what he had in his hands. Jennifer picked up one of them and started reading faster, as if feeling that something there wasn't right, but no one dared to ask, nor comment, nor to touch on the subject. I finished the wine, grabbed another slice of Helen's pie, even though I wasn't hungry, and ate it to the end. While the sounds of the room seemed more distant, I felt like a stranger in what I once called home. When the supper was over, the guests left one by one. No one congratulated me on the food. No one asked how I was. They only left in silence, as if witnessing something that does not know if it is a tragedy or punishment. Helen was the last to leave. She walked over, squeezed my hand tightly, and whispered, "He has no idea what he lost." I just shook my head. I didn't want to cry in front of her. When I closed the door, I heard Ethan and Jennifer's footsteps upstairs. They had climbed as if they were the owners of the place. I stayed in the living room for a while, looking at the fireplace. The embers still alive, the heat hitting his face. I took a blanket, sat in the armchair that belonged to Elizabeth, and let the night pass in silence. I heard the muffled laughter of the two in the guest room. They laughed as if nothing had happened, as if I were invisible, as if that house had no history. That corroded me. And there, that night, I understood. The love I gave was forgotten. The name they carry has been used. And now the house where they lived in favor was the stage of my exile. But I didn't cry. I didn't fight. I just started to think. The briefcase I handed over that night was just the first step. A warning. A polite gesture from someone who decides not to beg anymore. Because when we are pushed into silence, silence becomes a strategy. And I had one. They didn't know it, but that supper was the last in which they would see me silent. Do you know what was inside that folder? Contracts, deeds, bank movements, but most importantly, it was time. The time I spent watching, waiting, preparing. And now, every second of pain I experienced would be returned. Not with screams, but with justice. But before that, something even dirtier would come to light. Something I would discover unintentionally. And that would change everything. Do you have any idea what they were up to behind my back even before that supper? Then listen to what happened in the days that followed. That's when the real betrayal starts to appear. The next morning the house was silent, but it was a different silence. It was no longer that sad silence of a widower trying to keep the Christmas spirit going. It was the silence of someone who had just woken up from a dream that was too long. I walked down the stairs slowly, the smell of stale wine still in the air, and noticed that the briefcase I'd handed out the night before was lying on the sideboard in the entryway. They hadn't even bothered to take her with them to the bedroom, as if it was worth nothing, as if I was worth nothing. But the truth is that they didn't know what that meant. Still, I went to the kitchen, made my bitter coffee, the way Elizabeth did when she needed to think, and sat down with the notebook on my lap. I began to write down what I remembered from the last few weeks. Jennifer's loose sentences, Ethan's looks, the apologies when I asked about bills, the papers he insisted I sign to update the house insurance. But I never signed. Something told me that there was more behind it. I've always had that instinct. Elizabeth said that my silence was not weakness. It was radar. I finished breakfast, went to the office, and started rummaging through folders, envelopes, old boxes. At the bottom of a drawer, I found an envelope that Ethan had left with me weeks earlier. He said it was a bank thing, but that I could sign it calmly. I said I would see it later, thankfully. Inside it, a copy of a transfer of possession form from the house, with my name already filled out and only the signature missing. The paper said that I was donating the house to Ethan's name. Donating, as if it were a handout, as if it were my obligation. I kept looking. In the office trash, I found a crumpled sheet of paper with a printed email. It was from Jennifer to a broker in the Oak Park area. The message was direct. My father-in-law is stubborn, but he is already old. We will sort out the paperwork first and then deal with it. The house is worth more than he imagines. The house is worth more than I imagine. I read that about 5 times. My fingers trembled. It wasn't just contempt. It was a plan. They were planning my departure long before that supper. I returned to the living room with the sheet in my hand. I sat in Elizabeth's armchair, looked at her portrait on the shelf, and felt ashamed. Shame for not having realized before, for having given everything, for having trusted. I remembered the time I sold my boat to pay the down payment on Ethan's apartment in Evanston. I remembered the month when I paid for his studies and delayed my own health treatment. All this, for that. But the shame soon turned into something else. It turned into indignation. And then a calm that scares even me. Because when we don't scream, we think. And when he thinks, he acts with precision. I started printing everything. I separated folders, labels. I opened the old notebook that Elizabeth used to make spreadsheets and started to put together a dossier. Names, dates, values, the name of the broker, printed messages, the copies of the attempts to outsmart me. I even recorded an excerpt of an old conversation in which Ethan said on the phone that the house was too big for one old man. Now every detail fell into place like a puzzle piece. The kind of puzzle that, when you're done, shows you the face of the person who cheated on you. There, that day I made the decision. I was going to act, but in my own way. No scandal, no audience, without asking permission. And if you've been here until now, listening to this story that still hurts in every corner of me, I want to thank you. I'm here opening my heart, telling everything about how it happened. If you are there on the other side, listening to me with an open heart, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because there is still a lot that I need to share. There are things that I never told even my sister, and that now, maybe it's time. That night I slept little, but I didn't cry. I sat with a blanket on my lap, the evidence scattered around me, and the thought far away, thinking about how Elizabeth would react if she saw that. And you know what's sadder? I think she already knew. Mother feels. And maybe she would have left me this mission, not to let our history be erased by greed. And the next day, without them noticing, I made my first visit to the lawyer, an old friend from the construction company's days, who owed an old favor. But it's another part of the story. And when you know what I discovered after that, you'll understand why everything I did, it was necessary. Can you imagine what they tried to do after they saw that I wasn't going to give in? So wait and see, because the worst was yet to come. I went down to the basement on that freezing morning, more to escape the noise upstairs than for any other reason. Ethan and Jennifer were still at home, pacing as if they owned the place. And I, made a guest. Downstairs the smell was of old wood, dried paint, and souvenirs. I turned on the dim light and walked to the corner where I keep the boxes of our history, most of them with labels written by Elizabeth. One read, Ethan, childhood. I opened it carefully. There were old photos, already a little yellowed. One of them paralyzed me. Ethan at the age of 7, smiling in front of the Grand Canyon. I remember that day as if it were now. We traveled by car, crossing 3 states, just to fulfill his dream of seeing the giant hole he had seen in an encyclopedia. I slept in the car seat while he snored with his head on my shoulder. I took a folded letter from the bottom of the box. It was from my college days. Dad, every penny you send makes me want to win for both of us. Thank you for believing in me. I read that in silence, feeling a twinge that wasn't just nostalgia. It was really hurt, because this boy in the letter, he existed, and I gave him everything. I did double shifts on the site in Chicago, even with the spine jamming. I sold my boat, that old Chris Craft that Elizabeth and I had refurbished with our own hands, just to pay the down payment on his apartment in Evanston. I remember to this day the day I handed over the key. He cried, hugged me. He said I was the greatest man he knew. I spent a while more leafing through the photos. Christmas 1998, all with ridiculous hats. Elizabeth laughing, Ethan opening present on her lap, Me trying to carve the turkey without spilling the gravy. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And now I was just a weight in the bank account. An obstacle. A problem that needs to be solved calmly, as Jennifer wrote in the email to the broker. I found myself thinking about last Christmas with Elizabeth. She was already weak, but insisted on setting up the tree. Said, "If I give up now, Christmas dies with us." She believed that rituals held back the cracks of the family, and I tried after she was gone. I tried to keep everything standing, but what stands on its own eventually collapses. The pain began to take another form. It was no longer that knot in my chest. It was a bitter clarity, a kind of dark peace that only comes when we stop trying to explain ourselves. The truth was simple and cruel. I was erased, for those I loved the most. And if before I was still looking for some excuse, some justification, there in that cold basement among the memories of what we once were, I stopped looking, because some answers hurt more than silence. I climbed back slowly, box in hand. Ethan was in the living room, fiddling with his cell phone, as usual. Jennifer was talking on the phone in the hallway, mentioning my name as if I wasn't in the same house. "He doesn't even know how to use his own money," she said, laughing. I closed the door to my room. I lay down with the box on my lap and promised myself that none of this would be in vain. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I am the same man who erected walls in the snow, who supported his family with a calloused hand. Silence is not weakness. It's just the time we need to aim right. And I was already aiming. Now tell me, do you think they would stop there? Well, wait to see what I found out the next day. There, yes. I saw how far they were willing to go. And that's when my decision became even clearer. In the days that followed, I became a shadow inside my own house. It's not an exaggeration. No. I woke up, heard their footsteps in the hallway, and went back to bed. I, who always started the day by putting coffee on the fire even before the sun came up, found myself wrapped in the blanket until noon, without the courage to face the noise of the two talking loudly, as if nothing had happened. Ethan laughed. Jennifer spoke of knocking down the kitchen wall to open up the space. And I was there, in the room, listening to everything, lying down, with Elizabeth's ring tight between my fingers. She used to say that the house had life. "Every corner holds our voice, David," she said. But now, everything was echo. I would spend hours staring at the ceiling, remembering the first time I painted that room with her. The paint stained the floor, and we laughed until we cried. Now neither laughter nor tears, just a hole in the chest. I received a message from Helen. "I'm here if you need me." But I didn't have the courage to answer. It wasn't pride, it was tiredness. A tiredness that weighs more than any age. The kind of tiredness that makes us think about giving up. There was a day when I got to take the papers from the house, put them on the table along with my identity card, and started looking for refugees in another state. I thought about donating the house to an institution that would help children. I thought about disappearing without a trace. Because the pain of being rejected by a stranger is one thing, but being erased by a child? Right. It's like dying standing. I remember getting up and going to the living room window. Outside, the garden I had tended to for years was all covered in snow. The trees were bare. And yet, there was a sad beauty in that scene. A beauty that told me that life still pulsates even in the cold. I took a deep breath, leaned my forehead against the glass, and thought, is it worth continuing to fight? And then, like a whisper inside me, I heard Elizabeth's voice. It was not imagination, it was memory. She sang, "They can take away everything but who you are." And that's why, if you've come this far with me, stay a little longer. Because as dark as it gets, there's still a part of this story that will make you understand why I didn't give up. There are things that will still happen, that even I couldn't imagine at that moment. That night, I locked myself in the room once again, and I heard, through the half-open door, Jennifer say, "We can take that old closet out of the office and make a modern closet." Ethan replied, "After he leaves, we change everything." That went through me like a knife. After he leaves. It wasn't if, it was when. They were already talking about me as someone who was no longer there, as if I were already just an obstacle, an old piece of furniture, something that hinders the new decoration. I sat on the edge of the bed, with the ring still tight between my fingers. My eyes no longer cried. They had nothing left to spill. I just repeated inside, "They don't see me anymore. They buried me alive." That was the worst night. The lowest point. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just stood there listening to the footsteps of the two going to the kitchen, opening the fridge, walking from one side to the other, making plans. And in the midst of that bitter silence, something began to be born inside me. Still small, frail, but different. It was like a spark. And I thought, if they think I'm invisible, then they will regret the day they left me in the dark. Can you imagine what can happen when a man who has lost everything decides he has nothing left to lose? From that moment on, I stopped being the rejected father, and I started to become the man who was going to turn the tables. Just wait to see the first move I made. They didn't even see where it came from. I woke up before the sun. The sky was still dark, and the cold air invaded through the cracks in the window. But that morning, something in me didn't tremble. I dressed slowly, put on the thick coat that Elizabeth always said made me bare-faced, and walked down the stairs in silence. Ethan was still asleep. Jennifer too. And that was good. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want explanations. I wanted a path. I crossed the street with my hands in my pockets and walked to downtown Oak Park. The city lights were still on, but the day was already threatening to dawn. I sat on the bench in the square in front of the old red brick building where Richard's office was located. I waited half an hour until I saw the lights come on inside. Richard was my colleague in my youth, before becoming a lawyer. We built many houses together, built a lot of walls. He hung up his suit a few years ago, but he still kept the key to the office out of habit. I knocked on the door and it opened with the face of someone who already knew. "David," he said, and his gaze went straight to my face as if guessing that it wasn't a coffee visit. We went in, sat down. He passed him coffee and waited. I waited too. And only after the first sip, with the strong taste of the old grain, did I start. I told him everything. Of supper, from the phrase, from the folder, of the hidden papers, Jennifer's laughter, from Ethan's sentence, "You are no longer apart." Richard listened quietly, like a judge who already knows the verdict, but lets the victim speak. When I finished, he was silent for a while longer. Then he let out a sigh. They crossed the line. He opened the drawer, pulled out an old binder and began to separate some papers. He explained to me that I still had time, that everything Ethan tried to do could be reversed. He spoke of blockade, of reintegration, of documents that protected not only the house, but what was left of dignity. We decided together. The first step was to remove his name from the joint account I opened for emergencies, an account he used as if it were his own. The second step, cancel his access to the informal power of attorney I signed years ago when I had a heart crisis. And the third, reorganize the deed of the house, legally shielding me from any attempt to sell or transfer. I left there with a new briefcase. It was not revenge. It was defense. It was like building a wall when the storm had already arrived. I returned home at the same slow but steady pace. The snow was beginning to fall again, thin, discreet. I entered without making a sound. Ethan was in the kitchen, in his pajamas, mixing cereal. Jennifer sitting on the bench, cell phone in hand. I went straight. I went to the office, opened the folder, started organizing the documents, separate by date, reprint receipts. Ethan appeared at the door, suspicious. "What are you doing, Dad?" he asked. I didn't look up, I just replied, "Organizing my exit." He stood still, not knowing what to say. Jennifer appeared behind, trying to understand as well. But I continued with my hands on the papers, firm, without trembling. For the first time since that damn supper began, I felt like I was in control again, that I wasn't going to beg to be seen anymore, nor expect to be respected. I was going to make sure for myself that they never again set foot where they shouldn't. You know, there are times in life when we realize that continuing to love is not the same as continuing to allow. That pain needs to become movement, and that, even in silence, we have the right to protect what we have built with our own lives. If you've ever felt this moment of turning the key, of understanding that enough is enough, comment there. He writes, "I understand you," or "I know how it is," because there are pains that when shared become strength. I closed the folder and left everything ready to take to the registry office the next day. Ethan watched me for a while. Jennifer whispered something in his ear as if she still thought she was in control of the situation. But the game had changed, and they would only realize when it was too late. Now tell me, do you have any idea what Ethan tried to do on the same day he realized I was reacting? Well, it was there. that he showed who he really was. And then yes, I saw what my own son was capable of. You will understand. And maybe, if he were in my place, he would do the same. I signed everything with a firm hand. Richard looked me in the eye before stamping the last sheet and said, "From now on, no one lays a finger on this house without your permission." I just nodded in silence. The sale was underway, but it wouldn't be for Ethan, and not even for anyone who took my last name with that coldness. I met a young music teacher, recently divorced, mother of 2 girls. I wanted to create a home with the smell of cake in the oven and laughter in the hallway. Someone who looked at the house as someone who sees soul, not just wood and footage. We still didn't close the contract that morning, but there, at that moment, I had already decided. The story I wrote with Elizabeth would not be erased by the greed of those who forgot what the root is. On the way home, instead of taking the usual street, I turned left and ended up at Graceland Cemetery. I walked in slowly, hat in hand, and walked to Elizabeth's tombstone. The wind was cold and the leaves made a low noise, as if whispering what I couldn't say. I sat on the stone bench next to it and stood there looking at the date of birth and death. The years go by too fast, and at the same time they leave such a deep trail. "Liz," I said, "I tried. I swear I tried. I did everything I thought was right, but there was nothing left." Her silence was the same as always, but that day, he seemed to listen to me deeper. I stayed there for a long time, maybe hours, and when I got up I felt like I had left more than words in that cold grass. I left the last hope of reconciliation, because the truth is that I had already lost. Not just a child, but home, the legacy, trust. On the way back, I saw the house in the distance, the lights on, the silhouette of Jennifer passing through the room, Ethan sitting on the porch, fiddling with his phone. I took a deep breath, and at that moment, I made the definitive decision. I wasn't going to fix anything else. The crack was too deep, and it was no longer my job to fill in the holes left by their indifference. That night, he tried. Ethan found me in the kitchen, as if he wanted to start a conversation, as if the last few weeks hadn't happened. "Dad, I was thinking, we could paint the facade blue. What do you think?" He said this while chewing a cereal bar, without looking too much into my eyes. I turned slowly, leaned the cup against the sink, and said in a firm voice, "Have you passed me? So pass. But don't come back." He stopped, with the bar still in his hand. He laughed as if he thinks it's drama. "Dad, don't start." But I didn't let it end. I just took one step to the side, opened the pantry door, and continued organizing the glass jars, as if he were just an unwanted guest. Jennifer appeared on the stairs. She didn't say anything, but the way he looked at me showed that she understood. She felt it. Something was changing, and he was no longer just an old man hurt. He was a determined old man. "Now answer me. What do you think happens when someone who has lost everything decides to leave the past behind? But first, deliver one last unexpected gift? Because that's what I prepared, and no one, not even Jennifer, saw it coming. You will understand, and when you understand, you will feel it." I spent days in silence, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. While they laughed in the living room and whispered about rooms and renovations, I was in the back, preparing the ground. On the 5th day, I got up early, drank my coffee quietly, put on my most discreet coat, and went to the Cook County Clerk's office. I went alone. I entered with the documents under my arm and Elizabeth's name in my heart. The attendant, a quiet young man named Marcus, recognized me from earlier times and helped me without asking questions. I signed the paperwork, and at that moment, the house was no longer in my name and also in Ethan's. I created a small foundation in honor of Elizabeth, aimed at preserving historic residences in the neighborhood. The property now belonged to this foundation. They didn't know it yet, but they could never touch that house. Then I went straight to the bank. I removed Ethan's name as the beneficiary of everything: life insurance, applications, savings. What I kept my whole life to leave as a legacy would now be destined for something else. I still didn't know exactly what, but what I knew was that I wasn't going to reward betrayal. The following week, I made an appointment with a forensic psychologist, Dr. Harriet Langston. Discreet office on the top floor of an old building in River Forest. I explained the situation. She listened carefully, did the tests, the interviews, and then handed me a complete report. Preserved cognitive capacity, full autonomy, Absence of evidence of manipulation or mental confusion. I laughed, unwillingly, when I read that. Now, even to be lucid, we need letterhead, right? He told her. But inside, I knew it was necessary, because I didn't doubt that when the changes started to appear, Ethan and Jennifer would try to play the senility card. Only this time, I was 3 steps ahead. I returned home and began what I called my Justice Diary, a simple notebook with a blue hardcover, where I wrote down everything: what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I documented every expense on the card that Ethan used, Jennifer's exaggerated purchases, the suspicious exits that matched bank transactions. I talked to the neighbor across the street, Jim, who told me that he saw Jennifer receive a broker at the door of the house in November, when I was at a doctor's appointment. All of this entered the diary. Date, time, witness. As I said in the works, it is at the base that the structure is guaranteed. And I tell you, looking into your eyes now, through the screen, sometimes life pushes us to the bottom not to end us, but to show where we can be reborn. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. I still have too much stuff stored in here, and I know there are people out there who need to listen. At that time, the house was no longer theirs, nor the money, nor does it control it. But they didn't know it yet, and that was part of the plan. Because sometimes, the most accurate blow is the one that the person only realizes after he has already taken it. Now follow me. You want to know what their reaction was when they found out that the castle they were building, was it sand? Then listen to what happened on the day the first notice arrived in the mail. It was there that the board turned for good. I spent the next few nights awake, sitting at that oak table that I had sanded myself with my own hands more than 30 years ago. The whole house slept, or pretended to sleep, while I, in the dim light of an old Elizabeth lampshade, arranged each piece of paper that would prove what my eyes had been slow to accept. Printed bank statements, invoices for absurd purchases, copies of messages that a distant cousin sent me in secret, worried about the direction that family conversations had taken. Everything was going to be in my dossier. A thick, heavy notebook, almost as heavy as the silence that settled between us after that supper. And the more I put that file together, the more I realized that the problem had never been just what Ethan said, but everything he hid. One night I found a recording I made with no intention of using, a conversation between Ethan and Jennifer in the living room, while they thought I was dozing off. They spoke like someone who plans to change an old piece of furniture. We need to advance this. The faster it wears out, the sooner we solve our life. My hands froze at the same time, but I kept listening until the end. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I only felt a cut inside, one of those that don't make noise but that change us. And then came the final blow. I found out that Ethan had sold a watch that had belonged to my family since 1912. It was my grandfather's. After my father, then mine. A watch that had no price, but that he exchanged for quick cash and even hid the transaction in a resale app. When I saw the confirmation of the sale in the printed email, I stopped breathing for a few seconds. There, at that moment, I knew that the circle had closed. There was no going back. No excuse that I could clean it up. And you see, I had already swallowed a lot. But to touch what carries the memory of those who came before, then it was too much even for a patient man like me. I organized everything in a folder, labeled each document, and took it to Richard. He put on his glasses, leafed through the material for almost an hour without saying anything. Finally, he lifted his face and took a deep breath. "David, this is more than enough. They have nowhere to hold on." He spoke with a firm calmness, the way only old lawyers can do. I left his office with a mixture of relief and sadness. It was as if I was signing the closing of a book that I never thought would close. That same afternoon, we officially authorized the sale of the house, but I tied it all to a clause that would leave anyone speechless. All the money would go to a local public school in honor of Elizabeth, who taught children for more than 20 years. Her house, the house she took care of, decorated, kept alive, would be transformed into a future for other children, not a bargaining chip for other people's ambitions. And look, I'll tell you something that might explain why I'm opening my chest the way I am here. As I was signing those papers, I felt like Elizabeth was standing next to me, telling me that I was finally doing the right thing. And that's precisely why I say, from the bottom of my heart, stay with me until the end of this story, because the strongest moment of all this, it's yet to happen. I know. I feel it. It's as if my voice now is walking straight to the point where everything changes. The plan was outlined, each piece in its place, each truth ready to emerge. But what do you think happened when fate decided to speed up the pace, and the first official notice arrived at the door of my house, with Ethan's name stamped on the front? Because it was there, right there, that the mask began to fall, and it fell in a way that even I didn't expect. The morning after the warning, I was sitting on the porch holding a cold mug of coffee when my phone rang. She was the broker responsible for the sale of the house. Her voice was tense, almost shaky. "Mr. David, I need to report a delicate situation." My stomach sank, because at that time I already knew that when news came from them it was hardly a good thing. She took a deep breath before continuing. "I got a call earlier today. A woman named Jennifer introduced herself as his legal assistant and asked for access to all the documents from the sale. She demanded copies, dates, values. He said he was speaking on his behalf. I closed my eyes and didn't say anything for a while. Jennifer, legal assistant. She really thought she could bend any system with that air of superiority that she used even to breathe." The broker continued. "I thought it was strange, Mr. David, because, well, I know you. And I know that you are not one to delegate anything important like that, so I asked for formal proof." She hung up. "This to me constitutes an attempt at fraud. I wanted you to know." I thanked him calmly, but inside, something hot began to boil. It wasn't hate. It was an old, deep indignation that I had been holding on to since the moment that boy, the same boy who once held my hand to cross the street, looked at me as if I were a disposable weight. Later that day, the second blow came. I went to the bank to resolve the change of ownership of one of the accounts when the manager, a gray-haired man named Samuel, excused himself and called me to a reserved room. "Mr. David, there's something here that you need to see." He pulled the internal history of the system, that part that the average customer never sees, and showed me a denied request dated a few months ago. Request to open a credit line in my name. But I wasn't the one who had filled out the form. It was Ethan, my son, with a forged signature. The bank only refused because it found inconsistencies in the documentation. I stared at that screen as if I were in front of a stranger. Ethan, forged signature. My son, who I taught to hold a pencil, who I corrected homework, who I took to school so many cold mornings. My son. When I was finally able to speak, my voice came out dry. "Include this in the Homeland Security report, please." He nodded. I just got up and left. I walked back home slowly, feeling the cold wind cut my cheeks. But nothing hurt as much as the realization that he wasn't just cheating on me out of greed. He was willing to tear me up inside, erase me as a man, using my name, my history, and even my signature as a tool. And I tell you, there are things that a father endures, but there are others that pierce the soul like a knife. When I arrived, I sat down at the dinner table, the table where Elizabeth liked to place fresh flowers on Sundays. I opened the dossier and added the copies of the new documents. The folder was already heavy, heavy as a coffin. And there, in the silence of that room, just listening to the wall clock mark the time, I felt something in my chest, a mixture of grief and lucidity that I had never experienced before. I paused and stared at nothing, remembering things that sometimes we think we forgot, but that come back like a warm breath in the middle of winter, because there are memories that mark us forever, and no matter how much time passes, they stay there, stored in a corner that no one sees, but that we never really lose. If you who are listening to me there also have a memory like that, a moment that never left you, shares in the comments. Sometimes sharing these things is a way of breathing. When I came to myself, I carefully closed the briefcase. Not out of politeness, but out of respect for the evidence, because now I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that what Ethan and Jennifer did wasn't an impulse, it wasn't an argument, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice, thought, calculated, cold. They had set everything up long before that supper. And I, who had always forgiven too quickly, was now seeing everything clearly. Still, I didn't confront them. I didn't even raise my voice. I didn't even throw anything in anyone's face. I wanted the confrontation to come, but at the right time, and public, and fair, because I learned, after a lifetime of building, that some truths need to be revealed with all the lights on. And believe me, the light I was about to turn on was going to blind them both. But before that, something even more unexpected happened. something that didn't come from them, but from outside, something that shook the entire board. Want to know what it was? That's when the story takes its first real turn. I was tired of carrying everything alone, and maybe that's why on a cold December morning I decided to call Helen. My sister has always been my safe haven, even though I live in Milwaukee, even though I grow old with her own ghosts. "I need to talk to you. It's serious," I said, and all it took was for her to get in the car and drive almost 2 hours to Oak Park. We met at a small cafe on Lake Street, a place Elizabeth loved because it served hot apple pie even in the summer. Helen came panting, her coat still open, and when she saw me sitting in a corner, she raised her hand slowly, as if afraid to confirm that something bad had happened. Before she asked anything, I put the folder on the table. "That's it," I said. She opened it, and I watched her face change inch by inch until her expression became hard, almost old. First came the statements, then the messages, then the request for falsified credit, and finally the recording, the one in which Ethan said he needed to advance my wear and tear to solve his life. Helen put her hand to her mouth, and I shall never forget the sound she made. A muffled sob, small but so deep that it seemed to mix inside the cry of a sister and the cry of an aunt who raised that boy as if he were her own. David, he couldn't have done that. Not Ethan. Not our Ethan. Her tears fell on the edge of the briefcase, and I, who no longer knew how to cry, just put my hand on hers. "Did, Helen. And it was planned. It was conscious. It was cold." She closed her eyes, and for a moment the silence between us became as heavy as anything we had experienced since we buried our parents. Helen took a deep breath, wiped her face, and said in a firm voice, "They're not going to do this to you. No more. Let me help." I shook my head. "I already have a plan. But I need you for one thing." I handed over the folded paper where I had written down some names. Cousins, uncles, old family friends, people who loved Elizabeth. "I want you to call everyone. Tell him we'll have Christmas dinner here at home. A special tribute to Liz. Nothing more." Helen frowned. "Are you going to expose Ethan in front of everyone?" I took a deep breath. "No, Helen. He will expose himself. I'm just going to turn on the light." She understood, because he always understood. He took the list, got up from the bench, and went to the counter to order coffee to go. While she waited, I stared out the window of the cafe. Christmas lights reflected on the glass, people hurried by, children held bags larger than themselves, and there, in that instant, I felt the world spin slowly again, as if I had regained a piece of my strength. Helen came back, put her hand on my shoulder, and said, "I'll be there." And so do they. Everyone. Elizabeth deserves it. I nodded, wondering what Elizabeth would say if she were there. Perhaps something like, "You've always been stronger than you thought, David." We left together and walked to her car. Before leaving, she held my face with both hands, a gesture she made when we were children. "He's going to try something, you know." I took a deep breath. "I know, and that's why it has to be at Christmas. They plan to destroy me that day, so let it be there that the truth appears." Helen smiled sadly, got in the car, and drove slowly until she disappeared on the corner. And look, I know you're listening to me and probably feeling a pinch inside too, because there are moments in life when we realize that certain battles are not about winning, are about recovering who we were before we were injured. And that's why I say, stay with me, because what will happen at that supper, I don't think even God would prepare better. And now I ask you, what do you think Ethan did? When did he realize that something was being prepared on the sly, and not by him? Because yes, he felt it. And what did he do after that? It messed with everything. I waited for the right moment, not for revenge, but for dignity. I wanted to look my son in the eyes without trembling, without asking for an explanation, without begging for a crumb of respect that he no longer had to give me. 3 days before supper, I woke up early, made my coffee, sat down for a while in Elizabeth's armchair, and then I got up with the serenity of someone who has already decided what needs to be done. When I heard the noise of Ethan's car parking in the garage, I walked to the door with the notification in hand. I opened it before he even rang the doorbell. He stood in front of the house with that modern coat and his usual arrogant expression, but when he saw me steady, in silence, something about him was out of step. I held out the envelope to him. "Will you sign it?" he asked, laughing in the corner, thinking it was some silly bureaucracy. I replied in the calmest voice I've ever used in my life. "You don't have to sign. You just need to read it." He opened it, His eyes ran along the lines, and the next second the color disappeared from his face. What do you mean? Repossession? Formal notice? Dad, is this serious? He raised his head, already red, already trembling. Are you kicking me out of your house? I took a deep breath. No, Ethan, I'm kicking you out of mine. He exploded. He threw the paper on the floor, kicked the wood on the porch, cursed, pointed his finger at my face, screaming things that a son doesn't say even in a nightmare. But I didn't move a muscle. I just stood there, holding the silence like a shield. You've had 38 years to respect me, I said, staring at him. Now you have 15 days to leave me. Jennifer appeared behind him, getting out of the car in a hurry, adjusting her coat. She tried to soften her voice, tried to use that sugary tone she always faked when she wanted something. David, there must be some mistake. Why don't we talk inside? I stared at her for a moment, not with anger, but with the clarity of one who finally sees without veils. Jennifer, we are talking, and it's over. She still tried to insist, but I didn't give her space. I just turned my back and went in. The door closed slowly, with such a soft sound, but that cut them both like a knife. On the other side, I heard Ethan continue screaming, but his voice no longer entered me. The new lock, the one I had installed when I started the process, fit like a sentence. I walked over to Elizabeth's reading chair, the flowery one she loved, and sat down with an open book on my lap. I haven't even read it. I just let time pass. Outside, Ethan banged on the door. It called my name. Then he insulted him. Then he begged. Then he insulted again. The cycle of those who lose control. I just breathed. I lowered my eyes to the closed book. I ran my hand on the arm of the armchair, feeling the frayed fabric through Elizabeth's fingers over the years. I had recovered the house. But in that moment, I recovered something even greater. Myself. That night, while I was having dinner alone, I heard their car start violently. It was the sound of power changing places. They always thought they had cornered me, but now it was they who were surrounded by echo itself. And little did they know that what was to come. It was going to dismantle not only their pride, but the entire narrative they built to justify their own cruelty. Because he tells me, what do you think happens when people who are used to lying are forced to face the truth? And not in private, but in front of everyone? That's what comes now. And I guarantee you, no one there was prepared. That night had a different weight in the air, as if the walls of the house knew they were about to witness something that hadn't happened since Elizabeth left. The table was set as she liked. White linen tablecloth, the old thick glass bowls, the simple napkin holders she had sewn herself. The house was filled quickly. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, old neighbors, people who respected my story more than my own son. Everyone thought they were there for a tribute to Elizabeth, and they were, just not in the way they imagined. Ethan and Jennifer arrived last, always last. They entered with those expensive coats, strong perfumes, trained smiles. Jennifer held a gift box wrapped with gold ribbon. Ethan came towards me with that gait that always mixed arrogance and contempt. They thought they had won. They thought they had bent me. They thought that old David was going to cower in the corner of the table just like last time. But when Ethan opened his mouth to do his little play, I got up first. The room fell silent. A silence so deep that you could hear Jennifer's short breath. I walked to the headboard, pulled the chair slowly, and remained standing. The weight of the years seemed to have made me firmer, not more fragile. I took the paste, the same paste as the previous supper, only now, much heavier. I handed it to Ethan without looking away. I think you forgot that last time, I said. He smiled, thinking it was an empty provocation, but when he opened the briefcase, his smile died like a candle that goes out without warning. First came the deed to the house, signed by me, notarized, proving that the property was donated to the Elizabeth Turner Foundation. Then the transcripts of the recordings, printed messages, the extracts, fraud attempts, and proof of the credit line refused by the bank. He tried to close the folder quickly, but it was too late. Helen had already stood up, picked up one of the papers and read it aloud. Her voice trembled. Ethan, this right here is your forged signature, using your father's name. The cousins stood up. The neighbors looked at each other. Some murmured indignantly. The social mask began to crack there in the middle of the room, in the middle of the supper, in the middle of the truth. Jennifer turned pale, so much so that for a second I thought I was going to faint. Her gaze ran across the room like a child caught stealing candy. Only the candy was a house and the theft was planned. She tried to hold Ethan's arm. This is an exaggeration. He's manipulating. But before he finished, Sarah, Elizabeth's best friend, stood up slowly and said, "Girl, I saw you make fun of Liz's picture on the shelf. You don't have the morals to talk about manipulation." Ethan began pacing, his hands in his hair, repeating, "That's not right. That can't be. Father, you can't do this to me." And there, in that instant, I realized that he was not desperate for what he lost. He was desperate because finally someone had said no to him, for the first time. And you know, as I watched that scene, I kept thinking about how strange life is. We spend decades offering our hearts, and when we finally decide to keep it, people call it cruelty. I confess that this thought moved me, and that's why I say here to you who are listening to me, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Because that part of my life, it was not simple. When Ethan realized that everyone was reading the documents, he tried to snatch the papers from the hands of the others. That's a lie. This is montage. My father is unbalanced. It was then that Richard, who was sitting at the other end, calmly raised his hand. "His sanity assessment is here," he said, showing the forensic psychologist's report. "And everything is perfectly in order." Jennifer took a step back. The sound of her heel hitting the ground seemed to mark the fall of the two. A cousin approached, took another sheet and read aloud. "Intention to accelerate the wear and tear of the father to solve life." "Ethan, is that you talking?" The whole room froze. No one breathed. I remained seated, without raising my voice, without accusing, without shouting, just watching. And in that stillness, all the coldness they gave me came back to them. Ethan, who had always spoken louder, was now trembling. Jennifer, who had always been in charge, now didn't know where to put her hands. It was as if the stage they set up to humiliate me had turned against them. And it did, and in the worst possible way, with witnesses. But let me tell you something. As much as that was the big reveal, there was still an important piece missing. Something no one there expected, not even Helen. Something that I kept as a last gesture, last chapter, last turn, and that's what comes now. Because what happens when the heart is silent? But does justice speak for him? That next part. No one in that room was prepared to listen. When I noticed that everyone in the room was looking at me, waiting for me to say something, I took a deep breath and felt as if Elizabeth was there, putting her hand on my shoulder in the calm way she always did when I needed courage. I stood up slowly, with my spine steady, and looked first at Helen, then at each face around the table, until finally I laid eyes on Ethan, who trembled between shame and anger. "I didn't gather you here to destroy anyone," I began, my voice low but clear. "I gathered because the truth carries a weight, and this weight is not to be carried alone." Some relatives bowed their heads, others crossed their arms. Ethan tried to open his mouth, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. "I raised this boy with everything I had," I continued. "I sold my boat, I worked double shifts, I wasted whole nights trying to be good. And maybe, in the end, I got it wrong in what mattered most. I thought love was impossible to reject." Jennifer looked away, squeezing the expensive bracelet to her wrist as if trying to hold something that slips through her fingers. "But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to say that I forgive. I forgive, yes." I heard some sighs on the table. "I forgive because I have carried hatred for too long. And Elizabeth, she taught me that family is not blood, it's loyalty. It's the person who stays when the world falls, not the person who pushes." Ethan stepped forward, but no one made room. He looked smaller than I remembered, almost like the boy who one day asked me for help to assemble a wooden cart in the garage. "Dad, you're twisting everything." "No," I said without raising my voice. "You cheered. For years. And now life has just put a mirror in front of you." The silence seemed to expand through the walls. Jennifer, red, stood up abruptly, almost knocking over the chair. She left the room holding the bag as if it were a shield, the door slamming behind her. Ethan tried to follow her, but no one gave way. Not out of malice, but because at that moment, he was no longer part of that table. I turned my attention back to the guests. I did what needed to be done to protect what I built with Elizabeth, and to protect her memory. If anyone thinks I exaggerated, you can tell me now. Nobody said anything. On the contrary, some nodded, others shook my hand. And Sarah, Elizabeth's friend, blurted out, "She'd be proud, David." I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling that sentence go through my chest. And between us, there are certain words that come as a hug, even when the body of the person who would say them is no longer here. It was there in that instant that I felt that everything I had carried inside, pain, grief, fear, was finally finding a place to lie down and rest. "This house," I continued, "is no longer mine. She will become history. It will become the future. It will become an opportunity for children who have nowhere to study law. And you know what? Elizabeth would prefer it that way. She always said that walls only make sense if they serve to hold more lives. And maybe you who are listening to me now understand what I mean. Sometimes we spend our whole lives keeping the best of ourselves for those who will never understand, but there is always a way to transform this pain into some form of light. Therefore, stay with me until the end, because the deepest moment of this story is yet to come, and I promise you will feel it." Ethan, at that moment, tried to speak once more. "Dad, we can solve this in another way." But no one looked at him. No one answered. He no longer had an audience, nor can they, nor narrative. For the first time, his silence outweighed his words. "Justice has been served," Richard said quietly, from where he was sitting. It was not court justice. It was justice of life. And it was there, in that room among people who really knew the truth, that I realized that my voice, even without screaming, had finally found the right place to be heard. But one last thing was missing. A revelation that I kept until the end. Something that would make that night end with the same force with which it began. Because the last word, it was never theirs. It was mine. And it is this word that comes now. In the days that followed that supper, the house seemed quieter than ever. But it was a different silence. A clean silence. Like the air after a storm that took away everything that no longer belonged. Ethan and Jennifer packed their bags in a hurry. They passed through the corridors without facing me, without facing their own reflection in the mirror of what they had become. I saw Ethan carrying boxes that had never really been his, and Jennifer, her eyes still red, talking on the phone with someone who clearly didn't want to get involved in the matter. No one helps a traitor when the truth comes out. They left on the third day. They didn't slam the door. They did not wish good luck. They just went. And as strange as it may seem, as I watched through the window that final image, I felt a deep pain, but also a peace that I hadn't known for a long time. Because there, in that instant, I understood that losing a child doesn't start when he leaves. It starts when he stops seeing you as human. Photos of the house appeared on all county websites, and soon came the headline, "Historic Oak Park Residence to be sold to fund art programs at Elizabeth Turner Public School." The neighborhood was moved. I received anonymous notes in my mailbox, thanking me for the gesture, talking about how Elizabeth has always been light in the classrooms, how she inspired children who are now better adults. Jim, the neighbor across the street, stopped on the sidewalk and hugged me too long. "She would be proud, David. Very proud." I just patted him on the shoulder and kept walking, because any word from me at that time would turn into tears. Jennifer, a few days later, lost a large contract with a cosmetics brand. The recordings were leaked, not by me, but by someone who was at supper and thought the truth deserved to see the sun. All it took was an excerpt of her speech, the one in which she said that I needed to disappear from the equation, for the company to publicly announce that it does not condone inhumane conduct. Ethan, in turn, was taken out of the Evanston alumni group. Longtime friends sent dry, cold, some even aggressive messages, saying that they did not want more proximity to someone capable of trying to age their own father for financial interest. And as much as I have never wished anyone's ruin, I must admit, some falls are just the echo of what the person planted. I, however, did not celebrate. I didn't open champagne. I didn't smile victoriously. I just watched. From the living room window, sitting in Elizabeth's armchair, I saw the cycle close slowly. It was like watching the door of a room that would never be opened again. I lost a lot, but I didn't lose everything. I lost the son I thought I had, but I regained my name, my story, and the truth about who I had always been. And I also recovered something that had almost been erased, my own ability to move forward. The sale of the house has been completed. A young, simple family full of childlike laughter took the keys with shining eyes. The mother held my hand and said, "We promise to take care of it here as if it were our heart." I just smiled and handed her the old key. The one with the rosette design on the base. It was time to let go, and you know. And, as I walked down the sidewalk, seeing the house behind me for the last time, I realized that sometimes life doesn't give us back everything we've lost, but it does give us back what we really need to keep going. And it was there, with the cold air hitting my face, that I understood. The story was not over yet. Not at all. Because the most unexpected part was missing, and it came when I least expected it. Do you want to know what happened a few days later? When someone knocked on my new door, and when I opened it, wasn't he who I imagined? I moved into a small apartment in downtown Oak Park, in an old red brick building, the kind that crackles when the wind blows harder. It's a simple place, with the smell of old wood and creaking floors. But when I opened the door for the first time, I felt a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. There were no pictures on the wall. There were no memories scattered on the furniture. There was no sound of footsteps behind me. Only silence. A silence that didn't hurt. Silent as a clean sheet after years of sleeping on overly heavy blankets. I put my suitcase on the floor, sat by the window, and stared at the city. The lights of cars passing by, the steam rising from the storm drains, the buildings in the distance reflecting the late afternoon. I thought, so this is how an old man's life starts over, without anyone, but also without fear. That night I sat at the small kitchen table and grabbed a pen and paper. It had been a long time since I had written to Elizabeth, but the words were there, waiting. Liz, a lot has happened since I last spoke to you with an open heart. I told him everything. The supper, the phrase, the folder, the truth exposed, the pain of seeing Ethan become someone I didn't recognize. I talked about the house, the foundation, the children who would study with her money. I talked about Helen, her support, the strength she lent me when I had nothing left. And I also wrote about the fall of Ethan and Jennifer, not as revenge but as a consequence. They dug their own hole, Liz. I just stopped trying to stop it. When I finished the letter, I noticed that my hand did not tremble. I ran my fingers over the paper, folded it slowly as if I was keeping a piece of me inside that sheet. I put the letter in a drawer, along with her ring. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt longing, but a clean nostalgia, without a knot in the throat. I went to bed. The bed was simple, narrow, but when I leaned my head against the pillow, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. My whole body relaxed. I slept quickly, profound, without turning from one side to the other, without waking up in the middle of the night hearing footsteps or doors slamming. For the first time in so long, I slept with the feeling that I didn't owe anyone anything, that I didn't need to prove anything else or hold anyone's weight on my back. And you know, as I closed my eyes, I realized a truth that may take a lifetime to learn. Sometimes moving away from what destroys us is the greatest form of self-love there is. And it's not abandonment, it's survival. I didn't lose everything. I only lost what was never really mine. But life likes to test us when we finally breathe. And it was just at the moment that peace began to enter the door, that someone hit on the other side. A firm beat, 2, 3, and when I opened it, I swear, it wasn't who I expected. And what that person said, it changed everything again. When I opened the door that night in my new apartment, I found Helen standing there in the hallway, with that long coat she has always worn and her eyes teary. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. She just looked at me the way brothers look when they know that the other has finally crossed something big. He handed me a small bag with a panettone and an old photo of me and Elizabeth taken on the first Christmas we spent together in 1978. "I think it belongs to you," she said, and that little kindness. It was as if someone opened the window and let in a little more light that day. Helen came in, sat down with me. We talked quietly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that life was finding a way to get its act together again, even after the storm. She told me that Ethan and Jennifer had moved out of town, that they were temporarily living in a rented apartment near Evanston. He also said that, little by little, the family had stopped giving stage to their justifications. Each one went their own way, but no one else was fooled. I listened to everything in silence. I didn't feel a victory. I felt no cruel relief. I felt lonely. A distance that was already inevitable and that, deep down, was always growing, even when I pretended not to see. After Helen left, I stared out the window, the city covered in snow, and thought that was it, the closure I needed. The house had already been sold, the money donated to the public school where Elizabeth dedicated so many years. Ethan no longer had control over anything of mine. My part of the story was closed. And you know, despite everything I experienced, despite the scar that remained, I was whole. Maybe for the first time since I lost Elizabeth. I decided to walk that night. I passed by the coffee shop around the corner, the same one where she and I met in the 70s. I walked in, ordered a black coffee, sat in the same corner where she used to laugh at me for spilling too much sugar. And there, in the midst of that aroma of hot beans and the low conversations of the surrounding tables, I realized that I didn't have to fight against anything anymore. Life had given me a fresh start, and I accepted. It's curious how it takes us so long to learn some lessons that were in front of our eyes all along. I learned that love doesn't sustain everything, that sometimes the one we love the most is precisely the one who most disrespects our borders. And above all, that dignity is not something that can be negotiated. It is something that is preserved. If there's one thing I want to leave here, for those who are listening to me, it's this. No one deserves to carry the weight of lovelessness forever. Time is too short for us to live begging for affection where there is only ingratitude. And look, thank you really for staying with me so far. I know that this piece of my life is not easy to tell, and I imagine that it is not easy to hear either, but your company makes a difference. Your time here with me is worth a lot. If this story has embraced you in any way, give me a hug back by hitting that like button. It helps this channel keep breathing. And if you want to come back for more conversations, more memories, more coffees that warm the soul, sign up. It's like inviting me to sit with you again. And tell me in the comments where you are watching. I love knowing how far my words are going. Oh, and activates the bell, so you don't lose it when the coffee is brewed again. Today, when I got home from that long walk, I put Elizabeth's and my picture on the shelf next to the candle that I always light when I want to talk to her in silence. I touched the picture frame and whispered, "I'm still here, stronger than they imagined, and I really am. I am here, moving forward with firm steps on the snow and a lighter heart than I have been for many years. The pain is now just a memory. What I carry from now on, it's just what makes me feel good. And don't leave just yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on your screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.